Do you want
Yeah. My name is Jim Fargo.
Thank you, Jim.
If revenue increases become necessary at some future date, what recommendations would you have for revenue sources?
Okay, so it's a conditional. If, yeah, well, it's a given. It always is that there's never enough. So, and they've basically greased the skids. Again, I'm talking about the state, and this time of the federal government too, but the state I'll talk about at this level because I went through this yesterday with Ms. Ralphez. Yeah, they set the stage for it. They've set the table for it. And this one I really like. This is the one where they're going to, you take your that rich person you don't like, the one that lives at the waterfront, you know, on Bainbridge or Paul's Bow, and we're going to throw them under the bus having to do with tax increases. But for the unwashed masses that don't live there, that aren't the rich, they get something lowered. Now, Ralph has yesterday tried to suggest that it was going to be a reduction in the B&O tax or something like that. But again, another Faustian bargain. Once you get that income tax coming in, it's like any other tax. It's like the movie Aliens. We were watching it the other night on television. You know, we're basically eating through the various decks on the spaceship. It knows no limits. Once they get that down, as long as people just say, no, hell no. So, but how else to get around, if there is a shortfall, of course there's a shortfall because we're overmanned. But the answer is, as I told Ralphez, I mean, she got hammered over and over again on this. She said she has two choices. One, you lift the one on whatever it is, the 2/3 majority on the tax increases, or you take the poor people during these tough times and you put them out on the road to starve, like cats. I mean, you know, or people, you know, just the forlorn. So this was Christine. I mean, I could just see her, the Kleenex, and she was just crying about this thing. Well, there's another choice, and that choice is to cut back the manning. And we all know about, I mean, and I don't mean to bash the unions. I was a union member for a short period of time. But having to do with what the union pays as far as their health care policy, I think they pay 12 cents. The state pays, we pay 88% of that, 88 cents of that. The federal government, a friend of mine called this morning and he said, like my performance last night with Ralphez, and he pointed out that the federal government, it's 50-50. It's shared 50-50. So as I said to Ralphez last night, why couldn't you have the emergency that meant you had to suddenly start taxing everybody, the poor beer drinkers who drink, you know, Schlitz or Pabst, not bad beers, that's about my level, rather than the microbrews, save the kids from the bottled water and, and the candy. You know, so rather than do that, why don't you say that same emergency that cracked it open to say the 2/3 majority isn't in effect, why don't you go back and say to the unions, we've got a darn emergency here. Let's talk. Well, no way. Just no way that Christine Gregoire and Christine Ralphez were about to do that with the unions. That was just hands off on that. So the only answer really is, I mean, simplistically speaking, but no, I mean it really is. It's a poor one. Is to right size, to get the government right sized. And just for a second, I'll leave this with you guys. I was in the military for 30 years, Coast Guard Reserve. I was there almost full time, nonstop. But a couple of the things that I had to do with the Coast Guard was streamlining. And the Coast Guard, this was when Vice President Gore was Vice President. And he wanted to have better performance in state government. So he basically he said he wanted to have it. The Coast Guard saluted, flag officers wanted to be promoted, you know, whatever it is. They said, top. So they just basically re-racked all the billets, all the manning, all over the entire Coast Guard. I was the project officer for the 13th Coast Guard District. But the point of it being was the powers that be said, hop to, we want efficiency. And the way you're only going to get there, and to convince the people at the various bases and districts and air stations that it's fair, is to re-rack and look at everything. Look at all the position descriptions and this and that. And then we became the happy Grim Reaper. You know, a lot of people had to go marching from this base to that base, you know, with trying to minimize it. But the state needs to do something like that. Otherwise, you never get there. It's like total funny money. Or Alice in Wonderland about, well, Ralphez was busy yesterday trying to tell the good readers of the Kitsap Sun, the watchers of the Kitsap Sun, that they had to do it. Actually, you know, I mean, they cut back. They cut back 100 people or something like that, and they furloughed a bunch of people. Well, it was a shell game. If you look at the trend, and this is in government in general, but for our state government, the one that drove down the surplus we had after Rossi lost, the government has continued to grow. So what they do is they sort of, like the previous year, they uptick it a little, and then it's a game you do with the budgets. And the next thing they say, oh, darn, you people, you really drive a hard bargain. We're going to cut 100 people off. See, we really care. And it leaves Ralph is to go up there and, we cut 100 people. That's malarkey. I mean, it's, I'm not saying sack all the government workers, by no means, but there's no reality as to how many we have. So the solution, that's a big part. To get a handle on the cost, not forever going to the government like a crack addict, saying, well, the answer is, I'll just feel better. Just give me some more of this stuff, and then I'll be nice and happy. So, anyway, just as that's passed around, since I'm not a career politician, Ms. Ralph has spent the first 5 minutes, and all I heard was blah, 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 blah. All the things that she had done. Big spender. There was never any dollar sign to what she spent, but all these things, the goodies she brought for various people. I couldn't do that because I'm not a career politician. And may I never be a career politician. Maybe get a stint out of it and just have my wife beat me over the head and said, enough of that, time to retire and go back to do what you're doing. But the packet that's there was, I mentioned streamlining. I did a bunch of stuff for the Commandant, I was at the Pentagon. And I somehow, I did a good job, being modest. And people recognized it and gave me commendation medals, and the Chief of Naval Operations gave me a Meritorious Service Medal for an expeditionary warfare unit. So that's the background that I can bring to it. I'm a private businessman, and I've been for a long time, and that's my bedrock thing. But that's what I have to speak to counter the fact that the person I'm running against is a career politician.
What would you like to see done to improve the climate for business in the state?
Well, I think that if we could do some of the things that I've just been going on about getting the insatiable appetite of government less, not requiring the constant infusion of taxes, special sessions, running up the bills on that. That would be a good part of leaving the state somewhat lean and mean, well-educated for a good price. That, because as we all know, money into education or into any program is not the answer. They keep saying about education. If we could just pass that next levy, Washington, D.C. is a great one. I think they pay like 3 times the amount of any other state does, and their education is the worst in the world. So we need to create a healthy environment here of right-sized government. We need to take a look at tax incentives for businesses, and specific ones. I can't tell you, but I know that I heard it on, it was a very interesting interview that John Carlson did with the governor of Idaho. Can't remember the good governor's name. Very nice guy. Very savvy guy, plain spoken, straight carries his own bag and that kind of stuff. So he happened to be over here and he was on the John Carlson stuff. But the point was that he had made entreaties to the businesses of Washington as our legislators were busy there wringing their hands saying, "We emergency, we have to have more taxes," and all the other cockamamie stuff that they were doing. He said something out to all the businesses statewide. He got a blast and said, "Hey, you can vote with your feet. We'd love to have you. Come to Idaho." So if you create a good environment, and I had a son that went to the University of Idaho, and he paid less as an out-of-state tuition than you do as an in-state tuition in Washington State. And I like to say, go figure. It's not complicated. It's got to do with the people who are running the shop and the cost of livings that are built into the various unions and the professors and things like that. And it was a very good education. So if we create things like incentives, sane government, there's got to be some other things that are just escaping me. But we need to create that environment. Enough.
And we get it. Yeah.
What's the government's role in protecting the rights of private property owners?
Well, Brendan, that's a good one. I think government sort of forgot that one as what their right is to protect property owners. I don't know that the government, as currently configured, be it little government, I'll talk about our local jurisdictions, you know, like the state, I mean Bainbridge and Paulsville and places like that, and working the way up to the county and the state and the federal government. I don't know that they really even process it in those terms. You know, the Shoreline Management Act, there's a bunch of stuff flashing around about that, having to do with 150-foot setback of anybody. You know, there's like 8 million types of vegetation and things that they want to protect. And if you live on the waterfront and you happen to have anything going on within 150 feet of the water, then you know it's a non-conforming and basically takes away the value. As someone else pointed out, if that indeed does happen, everybody else picks up the tax bill because they basically have a piece of property, unless they happen to live there, has no value. So I don't think that government takes its charge seriously to protect private property. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of taxation at its heart. Unfair taxation. I recognize we have to have some taxation. I mean, everybody's not going to just wing it on their own. But excessive taxation is an unfair taking of people's. Somebody referred to it. Oh, it was a guy on the radio years ago. It was named Pastor Pete. Anyway, he referred to it.
Wiseback.
Yeah, Wiseback. But it was an eloquent way he talked about people's lifeblood. That people's lifeblood and life energy get taken. Well, so we have, because of excessive size of government, that goes on. I mentioned, because it was happening in the news recently, about McDonald's, to save the kids from eating fat foods. The government has taken on the role of a nanny state and controlling it with no regard, with little regard, probably no regard, for the recipient of it. I mean, they have the social engineering programs, has to do with families, has to do with tax credits. I have a son in the military, a good pilot, captain in Afghanistan. The things that he has to deal with, having to do with, you know, rules of engagement, which is not, we're not talking about warfare here, but he's got, you know, he's telling somebody, a warrant officer, to do something. So what does she turn around and say? Well, I'm going to file an EO complaint, you know, an employment opportunity complaint against you, and basically take this good officer, who's supposed to be in a warfare, and wrap him around the axle. So government comes up with all these cockamamie things about, again, discrimination. We shouldn't have discrimination. I mean, you know, that shouldn't be condoned, but it goes so far excessively in the other direction that, if you will, the special interest becomes the primary interest, and if you happen to be some regular guy or gal paying your taxes, you know, you're fair game. You're fair game to who they're going to tax. So.